"You've been warned," Colleen Durrett said, her voice like glass dragged across tile. "Second violation for unsupervised minors. If it happens again, the board will escalate." I didn't blink. My daughter was in the bath, alone, in our locked home. "And yet," she smirked, tapping her clipboard, "the master key said otherwise." I leaned against the door frame, keeping my tone even. "That lock reports back to my private server. I log every entry, including yours, at 6:41 p.m. Her smile faltered just a twitch before she blinked too slowly and forced it back. "We have access for safety inspections. I'm a federal compliance auditor for network security and digital privacy. I built that system. You triggered a multi-point alert." I watched her mouth shut itself mid-rebuttal. "My name's Jeremy Hayes. I didn't buy this house to play neighborhood politics. My wife and I moved here for the quiet, for the yard big enough to plant her favorite tree, the one in the back now towering above the fence line. She passed 2 years ago. Cancer doesn't care about your zip code. Since then, it's just been me and Lila. My daughter is 11, a reader, soft-spoken, and strong in ways kids shouldn't have to be. That night, while she bathed with the radio on and our therapy dog curled up outside the door, Colleen Durrett, HOA secretary and neighborhood royalty, used her master key to check on a noise complaint. That's what she wrote in the official citation. What she didn't know is that our smart lock system caught the entire thing, time-stamped, audio-logged, and quietly sent to an encrypted drive. The violation notice was taped to our mailbox the next morning. Colleen didn't bother knocking. She knew what she'd done. She also knew what it would look like if I went public, so she hit first, with paperwork, fine threats, and a second violation strike. But this wasn't about rules. This was about her pride, her control. Because the thing is, Colleen's name didn't appear in the HOA's official smart lock system access logs, and it should have, which means she bypassed protocol, used an override badge, maybe even kept a personal copy of the old keycard code from before the update. That's not just petty overreach, that's federal territory, the Stored Communications Act, the CFAA, maybe even state criminal trespass depending on how loud I decide to get. And I'm deciding. The violation wasn't the first. A week before, she cited us for nuisance pet behavior. Lila's dog, Mochi, barked once, because a stranger entered the house. The citation felt retaliatory, and now I know it was. I looked at Colleen, standing there in her HOA-issued windbreaker, confident in her clipboard and echo chamber of unchecked power. She didn't see me, really see me, just another single dad, probably overworked, too distracted to fight. What she didn't see was the camera in the doorbell she leaned against, or the log sync running behind me on my laptop, or the one email I'd already queued up, with a thumbnail of her walking in. "You said the complaint was about noise?" I asked. She straightened. "Yes," a neighbor reported, shouting. There was no shouting, just Lila, humming. She hums when she's anxious. "Well," Colleen clicked her pen, "that's subjective." "No, it's recorded." She blinked and her voice got sharper. "I don't have time for—" "Neither do I said and closed the door. She taped another copy of the violation to the frame, then left with her usual stiff little pivot, but this wasn't over. Because Lila cried that night. She didn't understand how someone could walk in like that. Said she thought it was me, but the footsteps were different, and I had to tell her, no, promise her, that no one was ever going to get through that door again without my say, not even Colleen. "Where are you watching from?" Because this is how it starts. Quiet, paper-thin rules wrapped in legalese and HOA language. Until someone lets themselves into your home while your kid's in the bath. They picked the wrong man to test. I don't fight dirty, I fight precisely, and I've already pressed record. The worst part wasn't the violation, it was how normal it all felt to the others. 2 houses down, I watched Carl from Lot 48 repainting his fence for the 3rd time in 6 months, because the HOA suggested the shade was 2 degrees too warm. Across the cul-de-sac, Mrs. Naylor's daughter had her lemonade stand shut down by Colleen for unlicensed commercial activity. And last week, someone put in a community complaint about wind chimes. Yes, wind chimes. On a veteran's porch. It wasn't just me. This entire street was under quiet siege and everyone was too tired or too busy to push back. Or maybe they thought pushing back would make it worse. That's how they operated. A fine here, a letter there. Keep it civil enough to avoid lawsuits, but cruel enough to wear you down. I took Lila to the community playground just before sunset. She needed fresh air, and I needed to look around. "Dad," she said softly, gripping the monkey bars with her small hands, "am I going to get in trouble again?" "No," I told her, crouching beside her. "You didn't do anything wrong." "But she said I was alone." "You weren't," I said. "You were home, and safe. That's what matters." From the corner of my eye, I saw Mr. Lanning, retired firefighter, probably mid-60s, watching me from a bench near the trail. He gave me a nod, one of those "I saw what happened" looks. When I nodded back, he stood up and made his way over. "You the one Colleen's after this week?" he asked. I gave a dry smile. "Apparently." "You've got a daughter, right?" I nodded toward Lila. "That's her." "She's been citing noise complaints like clockwork," he muttered. "Barked at my grandson last month for riding his bike too close to the retention wall." "She entered my house," I said, watching his eyebrows lift, "while Lila was in the bathroom." His jaw tensed. That's not just wrong. That's dangerous." "I've got it on footage," I said. His eyes flicked to the sidewalk. "You planning to do anything with it?" I didn't answer right away, then, "Yeah, just not the way she's expecting." That night, I started digging, not through files or papers, digitally. I looked into the HOA's bylaws, pulled up every clause I could find on emergency access. The wording was vague, reasonable entry under safety suspicion, but Colleen had no report to back up her claim, nothing in writing from a neighbor, just her word, and my footage said otherwise. I sent out feelers, private, carefully. In our neighborhood Facebook group, I dropped a general post about safety concerns with shared access systems. Not accusatory, just a warning. Reminder, if your home was built before 2018, your smart lock may still be linked to the HOA's outdated admin system. Worth checking your settings. 30 minutes in, 3 people replied. 2 confirmed they'd had unexplained entries. 1 said their front door logs showed activity when they were on vacation. None of them had reported it. None of them wanted to be next. I got a private message from Angela, Lot 21. "Colleen entered our unit while I was breastfeeding. She said she thought we had a gas leak. No report. I didn't push it. I regret that now." These weren't coincidences. This was a pattern, a long one. I opened a new encrypted folder on my system and started tagging the reports. I logged each name, each entry, each timestamp. I wasn't just dealing with a power-hungry board member. I was looking at a woman who used access like a weapon, and the longer it went unchecked, the bolder she got. At around 11:47 p.m., I got another message, short, anonymous. "Ask Teresa. She knows more than she says." I stared at the screen, my cursor hovering. Teresa Lynn, HOA treasurer. Quiet. Polite. She'd always looked uncomfortable during meetings, never quite spoke up. I'd assumed she was just a background figure, but now I had a thread to pull. The wind outside shook the windows a little, rustling the branches of the tree my wife planted. I glanced toward it, stronger than ever, roots deep and unmoving. Colleen wanted silence, obedience. She was about to get neither. I didn't expect Teresa to approach me. Not like this. Not so soon. It was late afternoon at the local grocery store, aisle 9, near the produce section. I was loading a basket with apples and some oranges for Lila's lunchbox when I caught sight of her out of the corner of my eye. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the stacked crates of tomatoes, but didn't quite know how. Hands twisted nervously around her purse strap, eyes flicking left and right as if watching for someone. I took a slow breath and walked over. "Jeremy," she said, voice low, hesitant. I wasn't sure you'd want to hear from me." I nodded, motioning toward the checkout line. "Let's talk over coffee, my treat." She hesitated, then followed. We found a small table near the window, the hum of refrigerators and murmurs of other shoppers around us. Her fingers trembled as she pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse, smoothing it nervously on the table before speaking. "I know what Colleen's done to your family," she began, eyes darting to the entrance every few seconds. "More than what you see, more than the violations and notices." I watched her closely. This wasn't just a casual comment, it carried weight. "Why now? Why tell me?" I asked. Teresa swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the paper again. "Because I'm tired. I'm tired of the way she abuses her power, the way she bullies neighbors into silence." A long pause stretched between us. The faint beep of the scanner at a nearby register punctuated the quiet. But, she added quickly, I'm on the board. I have responsibilities. If Colleen finds out I'm talking, her hand clenched the pad. Tighter. I leaned in. No one needs to know you came to me. I just need to understand. What can you share? Her eyes flicked back up, more steady now. Access logs, emails, internal memos, things Colleen keeps hidden from the rest of the board. I felt the weight of it. This was more than a quiet complaint. It was a crack in the armor. She paused, then continued. I've seen her override the lock system's permissions multiple times on properties where no emergency existed. Her voice trembled slightly. She's using the master key like it's her personal right. I don't agree with it, but speaking up means risking my position and more. I nodded, letting her words sink in. The conflict was clear. Teresa was caught between loyalty to the board and what she knew was wrong, between fear and the truth. Is there anyone else who feels the same? I asked carefully. She hesitated again, eyes scanning the aisles as if someone might overhear. Maybe, but no one else has spoken. Thank you for trusting me, I said softly. This could change everything. Teresa gave a small, grateful smile. I hope so. As she left, I watched her disappear into the fluorescent-lit aisles. Her body language had shifted, no longer closed off but burdened, like carrying a secret too heavy to keep. Back at my car, I sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. The pieces were coming together. Colleen's actions weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a bigger pattern, one hidden beneath layers of falsehoods and fear. And now, I had Teresa, inside, conflicted but willing, to help. I thought of Lila, her soft hands gripping the bathtub edge, eyes wide with confusion after that uninvited entry. How Colleen's cold intrusion shattered the fragile peace we'd been rebuilding since Mom passed. I clenched my jaw. Protecting my family was no longer just about keeping the peace. It was about exposing the truth. About stopping a violation of trust and privacy that cut deeper than any fine or letter. The legacy tree in the backyard loomed in my mind, the symbol of my wife's hope, strength, and the life we built here. I wasn't just fighting an HOA violation. I was fighting for our home, for that tree, for everything it stood for. I dialed Teresa's number again, ready to plan the next move, because this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Where are you watching from? Have you ever faced a situation where someone you trusted hesitated to speak up? Stay with me. This story is just getting started. The next morning, the mailbox held another slip, this one sharper than before. Disturbing the peace, it read, accusing Lila's therapy dog Mochi of barking excessively when Colleen supposedly entered the home. The letter warned of impending fines and hinted at possible eviction proceedings if the behavior didn't stop immediately. I stared at it, the paper trembling slightly in my fingers. The timing was no accident. Colleen was doubling down, trying to intimidate me into silence. It was retaliation, thinly veiled by HOA jargon. She wasn't just targeting me. She was trying to send a message to the entire neighborhood. Obey or suffer. I wasn't about to fold. That afternoon, I received a call while sitting in the parking lot of my office building. The familiar number popped up, Colleen's personal line. I let it ring out. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number, a terse message from the HOA's lawyer, warning me to comply with their demands or face legal action. I leaned back in the driver's seat, heart pounding. The gloves were off. Work was no refuge today. My laptop screen blurred as I sifted through emails, reviewing federal privacy laws and state regulations on property access. Every clause, every sentence weighed heavily, but my mind sharpened. I was looking for a weakness in the HOA's armor, something to use against their unchecked power. Outside, a light rain began to fall, tapping a steady rhythm on the windshield. I thought of Lila, curled up at home with Mochi, safe but scared. Every drop was a reminder of the storm we were about to weather. At home that evening, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Lila watched me silently as I paced the living room, running through legal options aloud, trying to map a path forward. I'm not going to let them win, I said, voice firm but tired. This isn't just about rules anymore. It's about protecting you, and making sure no one else has to live through this. She reached out, taking my hand in hers. Her grip was small but steady. That night, I double-checked the SmartLocks logs, scrutinizing every entry timestamp and access code. Patterns emerged. Colleen's badge had accessed our door multiple times without notice or justification. I cross-referenced this with HOA meeting minutes online, noting that Colleen often pushed policies expanding board access privileges, policies that skirted legal boundaries. The data was clear. She was abusing her authority. A cold determination settled in. I drafted a formal complaint outlining the breaches of privacy and unauthorized entries, ready to submit to local law enforcement and the State Attorney General's office. But I wasn't alone in this fight. Teresa's quiet support lingered in my mind. Her willingness to risk board backlash to help me had shifted the balance. The next day I reached out to her again, planning to meet and coordinate our next steps. As the HOA escalated their threats, I was preparing to bring in the outside authorities they had no idea were coming. I could almost hear the first crack in their facade. Late into the night, my home office was bathed in the soft glow of multiple screens. The quiet hum of my desktop was the only sound, punctuated by the occasional tapping of keys as I sifted through the smart lock. As digital logs, my fingers moved methodically, piecing together a puzzle I'd been building for weeks now. The lock system was supposed to record every entry, date, time, and authorized user. But what caught my eye were the anomalies. Several entries logged under Colleen Durrett's credentials at odd hours. The timestamps didn't match any board-approved inspections or emergency visits. Worse, some entries had been manually overridden, a feature only accessible to a handful of people on the HOA board. I paused, tracing the IP addresses linked to those overrides. The data wasn't just local, it had been accessed remotely. Someone was manipulating the system from outside the physical neighborhood. My background as a cybersecurity compliance auditor gave me the tools to dig deeper. I cross-referenced firewall logs and VPN activity with access timestamps. A pattern emerged. Colleen's access was piggybacked through an unregistered device, routed through a proxy server meant to mask location. This wasn't an innocent mistake or a glitch. It was a deliberate attempt to cover tracks. I pulled up the HOA's online portal, reviewing policy changes over the past year. There it was, a series of amendments quietly passed during meetings many residents weren't informed about. One in particular stood out, an expansion of emergency access rights to include electronic overrides without homeowner notification. Colleen had been the prime mover behind it, advocating for greater flexibility in safety management. I shook my head. That flexibility translated to unchecked surveillance and unauthorized entries. The implications were chilling. Not only had Colleen illegally entered my home while Lila was vulnerable, but she had also potentially violated federal laws protecting electronic communications and digital privacy. The Stored Communications Act and the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act both came to mind. I'd seen cases where similar abuses led to hefty fines and criminal charges, but evidence was key. And I had to be sure. I spent the next few hours assembling a secure dossier, screenshots of access logs, IP traces, timestamps, and copies of the HOA policy amendments. I encrypted the folder with multiple layers of security protocols, ensuring no accidental leaks. This wasn't just about my family anymore. It was about protecting every resident from this invisible intrusion. A notification popped up on my screen. A reply from Teresa Lynn. "Got what you asked for," it read. "Email logs attached. Colleen's overrides are all there. Be careful." Her trust meant everything. This confirmation from inside the board validated what I'd suspected and gave me the edge I needed. I reviewed the email headers and metadata. The digital footprint showed Colleen bypassing standard approval workflows, directly overriding system permissions. The pattern was undeniable. But digital evidence alone wasn't enough to trigger action. I needed an official complaint with clear legal grounding. I opened the State Attorney General's website and began drafting my report, carefully citing relevant statutes and attaching my encrypted dossier. The form required detailed accounts, and I recounted the incident of Colleen's unauthorized entry, the subsequent violations, and the escalating threats. Every word weighed heavily. This was my stand, not just against one woman, but an entire culture of unchecked HOA power. The next morning, I submitted the complaint and sent a copy to the local police department's Community Affairs Office. I also reached out to a trusted contact at the Federal Trade Commission, hoping they'd prioritize privacy violations involving digital systems. With the official filings done, I finally leaned back in my chair, exhausted but resolute. Outside my window, the legacy tree stood tall, leaves rustling softly in the breeze, a silent witness to our fight. I glanced over at Lila's doctor, awning taped to my desk, a bright sun, a house, and a big tree. She believed in this home. I had to protect it. The morning light filtered softly through the kitchen window as I brewed coffee, the familiar hum of the neighborhood slowly waking outside. But inside, the air was thick with tension. I couldn't shake the image from the night before. Lila's wide eyes, the way she recoiled when she thought someone was near the front door. That moment had changed everything. Colleen had shown up again, unannounced, this time staring through the window at us. No knock, no warning, just her silhouette framed in glass. It wasn't just an intrusion, it was a violation that cut deeper than any letter or fine. Mochi whimpered softly, sensing Lila's distress, and nuzzled her ankle. My daughter clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter, her breaths shallow. I pulled her into a hug and promised again that I'd keep her safe, but deep down, I knew the fight was just beginning. That afternoon, the phone rang, a call from the HOA attorney. I let it go to voicemail. Their lawyer's message was curt, demanding that I retract my complaints and stop disseminating misinformation or face legal consequences. Thinly veiled threats dressed up as formal warnings. It was clear they wanted to wear me down. Instead, I grabbed my laptop and began preparing for the next phase, making this personal, urgent, and undeniable. I revisited the smart lock logs, this time focusing on the exact moment Colleen had appeared at our window. The timestamps matched her digital override access. I overlaid audio clips from the doorbell camera, faint footsteps, the metallic click of the door unlocking, the soft creak of the window blind being shifted. Every detail was a piece of evidence. Then I moved to the backyard, standing beneath the legacy tree planted by my wife years ago. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled patterns on the ground. This tree was a symbol of family, roots, and protection. I ran my fingers along the rough bark, feeling the steady pulse of history beneath my palm. That tree had weathered storms and droughts. It stood tall because its roots were deep, and so would I. I mapped out a plan to formally submit my findings to law enforcement and the state attorney general's office. I drafted detailed statements, ensuring every claim was backed by time-stamped data and digital evidence. I also reached out to Teresa, sharing my progress and asking her to prepare for any upcoming inquiries. Her willingness to stand with me despite the risk gave me a surge of hope. Back inside, Lila colored quietly at the kitchen table. Her face, though tired, showed sparks of resilience. She asked softly, "Dad, will they stop coming in?" I smiled, pulling her close. "We're making sure they can't." That evening, I set up a secure video call with a federal privacy expert, a contact from a previous audit, who reviewed the evidence I'd compiled. Her confirmation that Colleen's actions likely violated multiple laws was the validation I needed to move forward confidently. As I closed the laptop, the weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter. This was no longer a battle fought with words and warnings. It was a fight for justice, privacy, and peace of mind. The neighborhood might seem calm on the surface, but beneath it, a storm was gathering. And I was ready. Have you ever felt your privacy was invaded or your home wasn't truly safe? What would you do if someone crossed that line? Keep watching. This story is about standing firm when it matters most. Teresa's message came just as the afternoon light was fading, short, simple, but heavy with promise. "Meet me tonight. I have what you need." I didn't hesitate. After locking up the house, I drove to the quiet cul-de-sac where Teresa lived, a modest home tucked between manicured lawns and trimmed hedges. The street was nearly empty, shadows stretching long beneath the street lamps. She was waiting on her porch, arms crossed, eyes scanning the quiet neighborhood like she feared someone was watching. When she saw me, her posture softened, but the tension didn't leave her face. Inside, we settled into her living room, a small space cluttered with HOA paperwork, laptops, and half-drunk cups of coffee. Teresa wasted no time. "I pulled the internal emails you asked for," she said, sliding her laptop across the table. "Colleen has been covering her tracks, but these show she's overridden the lock system multiple times without notifying the board." I leaned forward, scanning the screen. There it was, a string of messages between Colleen and an IT contractor, instructing covert access updates. One email even referenced a list of homes she planned to check on during off hours. "She's weaponizing access," Teresa added, voice low, "and she's been doing it for months." The weight of the confirmation settled in. I knew this information was crucial, official proof from inside the board that could not be dismissed. Teresa hesitated, then admitted, "I'm scared. If Colleen finds out I shared this, I could lose everything. My position, my reputation, maybe worse." I nodded. "I understand. But you're doing the right thing. We'll protect your identity as much as possible, together." We spent the next hour going over more files, board meeting minutes, digital logs, and policy memos. Teresa's insights helped me piece together how Colleen manipulated the system's back-end to create a web of unauthorized entries disguised as emergencies. Every revelation tightened the noose around her. Before leaving, Teresa handed me a USB drive. "These are copies of access logs with timestamps you won't find online. I'm trusting you." The trust wasn't lost on me. I promised to use it carefully. Back in my car, I sat for a moment, letting the gravity of what Teresa had risked sink in. This was more than a neighborhood dispute now. It was a fight against an abuse of power that reached deep into the systems controlling our homes and privacy. Driving home, the streets looked deceptively peaceful, but beneath the surface, the battle lines were drawn. That night, I began integrating Teresa's files into my growing case folder. With each piece of evidence, the picture became clearer. Colleen's actions weren't just violations. They were a pattern of calculated control. I drafted an updated report for the State Attorney General, attaching the new data. This time, the complaint was airtight. Outside, the legacy tree stood steady, its branches swaying gently in the night breeze. It reminded me of why this mattered: family, trust, and the right to feel safe at home. Tomorrow, the real work begins. I spent the next morning carefully laying out the blueprint for what had to come next. With Teresa's insider data now integrated into my case file, I had the backbone needed to escalate the matter beyond neighborhood squabbles. It was time to mobilize the outside authorities, the very ones the HOA had hoped to avoid. My home office, usually a quiet refuge filled with the soft hum of computers, felt charged with purpose. I lined up folders, printed copies, and encrypted digital backups, each piece of evidence tagged meticulously. The smart lock access logs, Teresa's email chains, audio from the doorbell cameras, and detailed incident reports all formed a mosaic of undeniable wrongdoing. The victory strategy was clear: trigger a federal privacy investigation supported by local law enforcement involvement. The HOA's violation of electronic communications laws and unauthorized entry needed to be met with official scrutiny. But preparation wasn't just about paperwork. I needed allies. I reached out discreetly to a few neighbors who had confided in me earlier, those quietly frustrated with the board's tactics but too wary to speak openly. I proposed a low-key meeting at the community center, a neutral place removed from the glare of the HOA office. The goal was to form a united front, showing the authorities that this wasn't a single grievance but a systemic issue affecting many homes. The response was cautious but hopeful. A dozen families confirmed they'd attend, eager to finally push back against years of quiet intimidation. In parallel, I contacted a trusted attorney specializing in privacy law. Her initial consultation over video call confirmed what I suspected. Colleen's pattern of unauthorized entries and digital manipulations exposed the HOA to serious legal liabilities. She advised careful coordination with law enforcement and the State Attorney General's office, emphasizing the importance of clear, documented evidence and coordinated witness statements. With my legal advisor's guidance, I drafted a coordinated statement and prepared witness affidavits from Teresa and a few key neighbors. Each affidavit underscored specific instances of abuse, reinforcing the narrative of widespread misconduct. Throughout the day, I balanced this strategic work with keeping Lila's world as normal as possible. Homework, dinner, quiet evenings by the legacy tree, reminders that the fight was personal and grounded in love, not just legal technicalities. At one point, Lila asked, "Dad, will the bad lady go away now?" I smiled gently. "We're making sure she can't hurt us anymore." Later, I tested my encrypted communications setup, secure channels, anonymized email accounts, to ensure our messages and evidence remained protected from HOA surveillance or retaliation. Every precaution mattered. By evening, the plan was taking shape. Submit the comprehensive complaint, DO. Dossier to federal and state authorities, back it with solid legal counsel, and galvanize community support ready to speak up when called upon. I sent Teresa a secure message outlining next steps and reassuring her of the protections in place. As I shut down my systems, I looked out at the backyard. The legacy tree stood resilient, its silhouette carved against the twilight sky, a beacon of hope and strength. Tomorrow, the first official step of outside intervention would begin. And with it, a new chapter for our neighborhood. The next morning felt heavy with anticipation. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, documents spread across the surface like a battlefield map. Each file, each time-stamped log, each testimony from Teresa and the neighbors. Every detail mattered now. The outside authorities were about to be pulled into this fight, and the stakes had never felt higher. I carefully compiled the final versions of the complaint dossier, encrypting sensitive attachments and double-checking that all evidence was clear, coherent, and legally relevant. After months of gathering, this was the moment to turn digital data into actionable force. With a deep breath, I submitted the formal complaint to the State Attorney General's office. The portal acknowledged receipt immediately, giving me a case number and a contact email. I copied the entire package to the local police department's Community Affairs Division and sent an encrypted message to my contact at the Federal Trade Commission, alerting them to potential violations of the Stored Communications Act. I wasn't expecting overnight results. These things took time, but I was prepared for the slow burn. Meanwhile, I coordinated with Teresa and a handful of trusted neighbors. We scheduled meetings to prepare them for potential interviews and affidavits. Each neighbor shared stories, instances of unauthorized access, strange noises at odd hours, unexplained HOA visits that painted a consistent picture of unchecked abuse. The shared stories reinforced the urgency. This was bigger than any single complaint. It was a pattern demanding attention. To safeguard our efforts, I set up secure communication channels, encrypted group chats, and private email threads. Keeping these conversations off HOA forums and neighborhood groups was crucial. We couldn't risk exposure or retaliation. Throughout the day, I balanced the growing pressure with moments of calm. Lila's laughter over a board game, Mochi curled asleep at her feet. These were the reminders of what I was fighting for. That evening, a call came from a detective assigned to the case. His voice was calm but carried weight. "We've reviewed your initial complaint and evidence," he said. "We're opening a preliminary investigation into the HOA's actions, specifically regarding unauthorized entries and potential privacy violations." A surge of relief washed over me, quickly replaced by steely resolve. "We'll be contacting your witnesses and may need further documentation," he added. "Prepare them accordingly." I thanked him and hung up, then immediately messaged Teresa. "They're moving forward," I typed. "Interviews soon. Be ready." Later, I revisited the backyard under the legacy tree. The night air was cool, filled with cicadas' soft chorus. The tree's branches swayed gently, a silent sentinel watching over our home. This fight wasn't just about laws or HOA policies, it was about reclaiming the sanctity of our sanctuary. I thought of my wife, whose memory was etched into every ring of that tree, how she would have stood with me in this fight, unyielding. Tomorrow, we would face the next phase, public scrutiny, testimonies, and the unmasking of Colleen's overreach. But for now, I allowed myself a moment of quiet hope. The wheels of justice had started turning. Have you ever had to stand up against something bigger than yourself? What kept you going when the odds felt stacked? Keep following this. Real change starts when we refuse to stay silent. The morning of the HOA's monthly community meeting arrived with a heavy sense of inevitability. The hall was filled with familiar faces, neighbors who'd grown tired of the quiet intimidation, those curious about the unfolding drama, and of course, the board members clutching their notes and legal jargon. Colleen Durrett stood near the front, her usual composed, almost imperious posture belying the tension I sensed just beneath. She greeted people with forced smiles, eyes darting occasionally toward the door as if expecting something she couldn't control. The meeting began with routine announcements, landscaping updates, and reminders about dues. Then, as expected, Colleen took the floor, launching into her defense, dismissing the complaints as misunderstandings and exaggerations. She spoke with practiced authority, her voice steady, eyes scanning the room for support. But beneath the polished veneer, I detected cracks, moments where her words stumbled or became clipped. When it was my turn, I stood up, heart pounding but voice clear. "I'm here not just as a resident, but as someone who values this community's trust and privacy," I began, glancing at Teresa and a handful of neighbors who nodded quietly in support. I laid out the facts, unauthorized entries, digital evidence, abuse of master key privileges, and how these violations affected not only my family but many others in this neighborhood. I didn't mince words. This wasn't about petty HOA politics, it was about protecting the sanctity of our homes. As I spoke, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Faces that had seemed indifferent shifted to concern, recognition, and even anger. Colleen tried to interject, but I held up my hand. I have submitted all evidence to the appropriate authorities, I said firmly. An officiaciat. The investigation is underway. This isn't a witch hunt, it's accountability. The room fell silent. Then Teresa stepped forward, courage etched on her face. I've seen the documents, she said quietly but firmly, and I stand with Jeremy. We cannot allow unchecked power to rule our community. The weight of her confession sent a ripple through the audience. Others began to speak up, neighbors sharing their experiences, adding their voices to the growing chorus demanding change. The HOA board president, caught off guard, struggled to maintain order, but the tide had turned. Before the meeting ended, Colleen's composure broke. She stammered excuses, denied allegations, and eventually retreated, leaving the room buzzing with a sense of empowerment. Outside, reporters from the local news had gathered, sensing the brewing story. The investigation was no longer just a quiet legal process, it was a public reckoning. Walking back to my car, I glanced once more at the legacy tree in the yard across the street, a symbol of endurance and hope. This community was reclaiming its voice, and I was proud to stand at the forefront. The community hall buzzed with an energy I hadn't seen in months. Neighbors trickled in from all directions, faces familiar and new, drawn together by a shared sense of urgency and hope. The tension was palpable, not just the typical HOA meeting weariness, but something sharper, charged. People were done being silent. As I stepped inside, I caught Teresa's eye across the room. She gave me a subtle nod, nervous but resolute. Around us, whispers spread, hushed conversations about the federal investigation, the leaked emails, and the mounting pressure on Colleen Durrett. Local reporters had arrived, setting up cameras and microphones in the corner. The story had grown beyond neighborhood gossip. It was now a public reckoning. When the meeting officially began, the HOA president tried to restore order, but the crowd's impatience was clear. People wanted answers, accountability, and change. Colleen entered late, her USU, all poise replaced by a guarded stiffness. She avoided eye contact, and when she spoke, her voice wavered beneath rehearsed defenses. I knew what was coming, an attempt to discredit me, to spin the narrative as a personal vendetta. But this time, the community wasn't buying it. When my turn came, I stepped forward with calm determination. The microphone felt heavier than usual in my hand, but my voice was steady. I stand here representing more than just myself, I began, scanning the faces that filled the room. This is about our collective right to privacy, security, and respect within our own homes. I detailed the pattern of unauthorized entries, digital manipulations, and the emotional toll it took on families like mine. I spoke about Lila's fear, the violation she felt when someone she didn't trust crossed a boundary no one should cross. The room was silent, the weight of the testimony sinking in. Teresa followed, her voice steady despite the tremor I saw in her eyes earlier. She shared internal emails and logs, exposing the deliberate cover-ups and the abuse of power that had been allowed to fester. Neighbors then stepped up one by one, sharing their own stories. Stories of doors unlocked without permission, unexplained entries, and the chilling feeling of being watched. The reporters' cameras captured every moment, the crowd's emotions laid bare, anger, relief, hope. Colleen tried to interrupt, her voice rising, but the moderator firmly held the floor. "You've heard the evidence," I said, "and you've heard the community's voice. This isn't about petty rules or misunderstandings, it's about trust, and that trust has been broken." As the meeting drew to a close, the HOA president announced that an emergency board meeting would be held to address the allegations and consider reforms. Outside, the gathering spilled onto the lawn, neighbors talking in clusters, some wapsiwis, wiping away tears, others offering words of support. The local news crews interviewed residents, their questions sharp, their coverage already shaping a narrative of empowerment and justice. I stood by the legacy tree in my front yard, its branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. It felt like a symbol of the strength we'd reclaimed, not just for my family but for the entire neighborhood. As night fell, I knew the fight wasn't over, but the tide had shifted. The seeds of change had been planted, watered by truth and courage. And that gave me hope, for my daughter, for the community, and for the home we all deserve to protect. The board meeting was a quiet storm, less noise, more sharp edges. The room was smaller than the community hall, its walls lined with faded wood paneling and rows of folding chairs, but the weight of what was happening felt immense. This was the reckoning, the moment where months of effort, evidence, and quiet courage would either shatter the facade or crumble beneath it. Teresa sat a few seats from me, her fingers twisting a ring nervously, but her eyes steady. Colleen entered last, her usual confidence chipped away by the gravity of the gathering. The air between us was taut, electric with unspoken truths. The HOA president wasted no time reading the letter from the state attorney general's office, a formal notification of an ongoing federal investigation into the board's actions. Every word landed like a blow. Allegations of unauthorized entries, digital tampering, violations of privacy laws. Colleen's face tightened, lips pressed thin. Her eyes flicked toward Teresa for a moment, a silent accusation met with quiet resolve. When it was my turn, I stood, feeling the legacy tree at home, the symbol of what I was fighting for, steady in my chest. I want to thank everyone here for facing this truth, I said, voice calm but resolute. This wasn't just about me or my family. It was about protecting every homeowner's dignity and privacy. I pulled out Teresa's internal logs and the compiled evidence, placing them on the table. These documents show a pattern of abuse that violated not just HOA policies but federal laws. It's clear the master key was misused, the system exploited to control and intimidate. Some board members shifted uncomfortably. Others avoided my gaze. Colleen finally spoke, voice low and defensive. I never intended harm. My actions were in the interest of safety. Safety, I interrupted, doesn't mean invading homes without consent, nor does it mean threatening families with baseless fines to cover mistakes. Her eyes narrowed, but the room's energy had shifted. The community was no longer in her corner. The president announced that Colleen would be removed from the board immediately, pending the investigation's outcome. The HOA policies regarding master key access and digital systems would be reviewed and overhauled with homeowner input. There was a collective exhale, relief, release, and the promise of change. As the meeting adjourned, neighbors approached me quietly, some with gratitude, others with shared stories of their own struggles. Teresa lingered, a small but genuine smile breaking through her usual reserve. Outside, the night air was cool, scented faintly with jasmine from a nearby garden. I looked up at the stars scattered across the sky, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Back home, I stood beneath the legacy tree, its branches stretched wide, unbroken, a living testament to endurance. Lila's voice pulled me inside. Dad, can we plant a new flower here? For Mom? I smiled, pulling her close. Yeah, kiddo, we'll make it beautiful. Justice wasn't just a verdict or a cleared name. It was a legacy of protection, resilience, and hope. And that legacy would grow here, rooted deep like the tree outside. Where are you watching from? Share your HOA stories in the comments. I want to hear your battles, your victories, your fight for dignity, because no one should ever feel powerless in their own home.